All right, thank you. So, hi everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Megan Robertson. I'm going to be talking about the 5 lessons I've learned throughout my career as a senior data scientist. If you came here looking for a lot of code, I hate to disappoint you. There's literally no code, no Python in this, but I have been coding in Python for over 10 years. And while my background is in data science, um, a lot of the lessons I'm going to talk through will be applicable to anybody who's working in a technical career. So data science focused, but if you're an engineer, product, any of those other careers as well, I think these lessons will be helpful for you also. So just a quick introduction. I currently have my own data science consulting company where I call myself Chief Data Scientist. If you want to be a Chief Data Scientist, just make your own company. You can be one too. And I offer many different services, anything from providing data strategy. Companies who hear all the buzzwords know they need to be using data-driven strategies, help them figure out how to get there, and then also doing things like predictive modeling, customer segmentation. And I've been working in data science for 8 years now. And prior to starting my own consulting firm, I was most recently employed by Nike, or Nike as they call it over here, where I was working on things like customer lifetime value modeling, doing some text modeling and natural language processing to understand the sorts of content that people were interacting with, working in a lot of different areas. So where are we going to be going for the next 24-ish minutes or so? Talking about 5 lessons I've learned throughout my career. I'll start by talking about how did I learn this lesson. For some of them, it was one really formative experience. Other times, it's just patterns that I noticed throughout the course of my career. I'm a data scientist. If I'm going to see a pattern, I'm going to try to summarize it and analyze it. And then moving on to why is it important? As I said, I've been doing this for 8 years now, and I've gotten this down to 5 lessons. I could have included more, but why do I think these were the 5 important ones that I wanted to share with everyone today? And then lastly, how do I apply these learnings? So I'm calling them lessons. If I've learned my lesson, I should be doing them my day-to-day, using them in those career. And that I think will be really helpful for the audience as well, because it's going to give you those action items to implement some of these things that I've learned. And so with that, let's get on to talking about some of these lessons. So the first thing I want to talk about is how important it is to connect everything you do to business or career priorities. So I've been fortunate enough to be in positions where I can go to a manager and pitch a project. Maybe I want to learn about a certain model and I say, hey, I really want to learn about, let's say, neural networks or text modeling. And when I had really good managers, they would ask me questions along the lines of, okay, it's great you're excited about text modeling, but how is that going to help our stakeholders? How is that going to help us reach our team goals? Really emphasizing that whatever we were working on needed to be connected back to those overall business goals. And then here I also just mentioned excuse me, career priorities, because for me, if I'm not working on a project that's helping drive some strategy forward, or I'm learning something new and developing myself, I found I tend to lose motivation and work becomes kind of a slog. So first of all, why is this important? Why do we care? I have to mention job security. I know not everything should be about having a job, but the reality is we all need to work, we all need to be making money. So this can be really important for job security. In full disclosure, I've been laid off twice from jobs. And what I've learned from that is when someone's looking at the list of everyone who's employed and their accomplishments, you want your name to be next to those projects that are really visible, especially higher up in the company, because that's what people are looking at and understanding, okay, the resources we're putting to that team, that's helping us to drive values. And that's coming through these impactful projects. So when you're working on those impactful projects, you're getting that experience and being close to those business decisions, helping to drive them. And when you're driving that high impact, again, that's what's going to help you get some of that visibility within your company. So now, what does this look like? If I'm thinking about, I'm at my job day to day, how am I making sure that I'm going to be on those projects that are going to help connect me to that business strategy? So the first thing making sure you understand that long-term strategy. Who in the room here thinks they could describe their company's goals for the year in 1 to 2 sentences? Oh, okay. So maybe something to think about for the room here, but you want to make sure that you really have a good understanding of what that is, because that's going to help you to identify then what are these high value projects. If I know my company is really interested in increasing their direct to consumer sales through a website, for example, I'm going to look for high value projects along the lines of maybe it's around marketing that drives people to visit that website, because that's going to help me really stand out with that. And I'll also mention under high value projects as well, it's really important to be high value relative to the company's goals, but then also thinking about your personal goals as well. So for example, with myself, I'm really interested in mentoring junior colleagues and managing data science teams. A high value project for me would be a place where I had a chance to maybe guide a more junior data scientist through that analysis process with me. So the next lesson, communication is an underrated skill, and this is basically my personal hill that I will die on any day. I've worked many years in technical fields, but all of the companies I've worked with in industry or that I've interacted with through my consulting practice, basically every day I have to be communicating with an audience who they're not data scientists. They're not very technical, but they need to have an understanding of what I'm working on so that they could understand how to use my analysis and my model outputs. And I found when I was in school, especially in graduate school, I would go up and present, here's the model I built for the course, here's what we found, but I was presenting to a room full of my peers who had all taken the exact same course as me. They had done the same math and statistics all semester. So I had to figure out how I could explain some of those complicated topics to those who maybe haven't taken a stats course since college, or if they ever have at all. So why is this important? Two main things. One, you really want to be fostering good collaboration with those stakeholders. So I'm guessing most people in this room have heard AI is going to take everyone's job. It's going to automate everything away. 5 to 8 years ago, machine learning, neural networks, and big data, those were also coming from everyone's jobs. And I don't say that to fearmonger, but my point is a lot of the non-technical stakeholders I'll work with, they hear that narrative, they don't understand how some of these technologies work, and they do worry about, if I work with this data science team, am I going to have a job in a year and be able to keep a roof over my head, support my family? So communicating throughout that process, though, you can help them to understand how your team works, but also how they still fit into that process and where their expertise comes in. And communication throughout is really important for that. And then next, also setting realistic expectations. So for many people, data science can be a black box. I had a VP once at a former company who literally called us the magic team, hence the little unicorn, which is great because that kept my salary paid and impressed him, but also meant he would go into meetings and be like, oh yeah, the data science can just do their magic. We'll have a model predict that in 3 weeks. And we're all in the back of the room like, who's going to say it? Like, I did it last time. So if you're communicating with these non-technical stakeholders and helping them understand how you work, they get a sense of what some of those timelines look like, what roadblocks could look like as well. And that's just really helps have like a strong working relationship amongst those teams. So now, what does this look like in practice? First of all, keeping stakeholders informed. So in my last position at Nike, I was a lead data scientist, which meant that I was to own the data science process from start to finish. So you start out meeting with stakeholders, understanding their pain points, what sort of analysis they need done, making a plan, executing it, and scaling it. So after I would go meet with the stakeholders, though, you come up with a plan and communicate it back to them. Give them a chance to ask questions. It can be really tempting to kind of go into your dark corner and just type a bunch of code and build a bunch of models and come back out in a few weeks and be like, hey, look, I built this model for you, or I wrote this code for you. But It'll help foster that collaboration I mentioned in the previous slide. If you're helping them to feel like they're part of that process, they also have expertise that can help you throughout the process. So maybe you're building a model to predict if people are going to click on an ad or something like that. You can go back with them, talk about some of the early data analysis you're doing, saying, hey, our Google ads are doing really well versus email, we're seeing nothing. Does that surprise you? Is that what you would expect? Using some of their input as well to inform that process. And then the other big part of that is having high level explanations. So I have gone in front of people who are marketers, who are sales team, and explained some like kind of complex data science models and algorithms. This is also one of my favorite things to talk about. I love making data science accessible. I've done whole talks on this one little box alone, so happy to discuss it more. But there are many ways that I can take the model I've done, explain it in 2 to 3 slides at a very high level so that my non-technical stakeholder can at least understand, why is this a good model for my situation? Are there any limitations that I should be thinking about, any assumptions that were made that I need to consider? And can just have a really, like I said, high level understanding of what's happening under the hood. I'm not getting up in front of everybody at a whiteboard, writing a loss function and optimizing it. You want people to fall asleep in your presentation, that's a great way to do it, but it's not going to help them get closer. It's going to frustrate them because they're seeing a bunch of unfamiliar symbols. So really thinking about how you can at least help them bridge some of that gap of that knowledge that they're missing through these high level explanations. Okay, number 3, the most advanced solution isn't always the best one. And I realize that's probably not the coolest thing to get up on stage at a Python conference and say, AI isn't for everyone, we don't all need LLMs. But the reality of working as a data scientist in industry is sometimes you just need to get the job done. So I remember one of my first jobs out of grad school, I was working for a company where they were tracking online engagement to content. And a big problem they always had was how to identify legitimate engagement versus non-legitimate. So what does that mean? Usually it meant a bunch of people in click farms located all around the globe would be falsely driving engagement to different articles, and companies would want to understand what was actually working in terms of driving engagement versus what was coming from those bad actors. And I laid out what I thought was an amazing plan. I said, have we thought about this use case and this and this? We got to make sure we're getting this sorts of data. And I remember meeting with the product manager and they basically were like, cut half of this. And I was so shocked because I was literally maybe 5-6 months out of grad school. And I was like, but this is like, I've got the master's degree. Like, if this is what you want done, this is how we should do it. But being the product manager, he had a more holistic view of what were some of the constraints we had, which leads me to my next slide. Why is this important? So in industry, you've got a lot of constraints. I'm sure people here have worked under deadlines or with limited resources, if I had to guess. And those often are what are driving a lot of the analysis that you do. Now, I'm not saying I'm going to do something that's completely wrong, just it's going to fit my budget or timeline, but the reality is computing resources can be very expensive and also have a high environmental cost to consider. And then also sometimes your stakeholder is going to come to you and be like, oh, by the way, we have this meeting in 2 weeks and that analysis you're going to get done for me, right? And you're like, I mean, I guess, but I didn't realize it was going to be under 2 weeks. So those are 2 things that'll really drive some of those, some of that analysis and that model selection that you're doing. And also, oftentimes, it can be okay to have good enough results. So what do I mean by that is, sometimes you just need to do like a quick summary analysis, or if I'm building a predictive model, maybe I have a really simple model that predicts something with a 66% accuracy. A more complicated model would only get me to 67%. If I can save a lot of time and money with that lesser model, that 66% can be good enough. Figuring out what good enough, that comes more from conversations with stakeholders and having a bit of experience. But my point is, it doesn't have to be perfect, especially when you're working in industry. So what does this look like? So when I'm starting a model building project, I will always start out simple. I will pick basically the simplest model I can. That's maybe the standard practice at the time. So that could look like if I'm predicting if someone's going to make a purchase or not, I might just start with a logistic regression. So if you're not familiar with logistic regression, that predicts basically yes or no. And it's something that you would learn in like a Stat 101 introductory statistics course. Very basic. And with starting simple, that helps me in a few ways. The main being, I now have a baseline to compare to. So I'll have a smaller amount of data that I'll fit my models on, look at those results, and then eventually scale it to my full production that I'm doing. So I have my baseline model. I might try some more complicated models as well, but I can always compare that to that baseline. So I know the extra time and effort that's going into that more complex analysis, I can now quantify that in terms of time, computing cost to do those comparisons. So that way, if a more complicated model does end up performing better, I can then have that conversation with my team around, was these extra costs associated with that more complicated model worth what we're seeing in an improvement in analysis? And then second is understanding trade-offs. I've already beat the dead horse of time and money, so I won't mention that again. But another thing to consider, especially with data science models, are things like interpretability. So neural networks are great, large language models are, all the rage right now, but sometimes you just need to be able to interpret the model that you fit to stakeholders. So something like a neural network is a bit more of a black box. If someone says, can you tell me about the effect of if I spend more in ad sales that I can expect to see an engagement in this campaign, that's really hard to do versus some simpler models. You can actually talk about if you spend X more dollars in your ad sales, we'd expect to see this Y% increase in engagement. Okay, so now transitioning to a bit more of like career focused. So 4, I can count, I'm a data scientist. It's important to remember you are your own best advocate. So I don't know if anyone went to Ludwig's LLM brag document talk, but he talked about this and it made my heart very happy inside. And I think for me, when I started working in industry especially, I expected it would go like school. If I did a good job, if I worked hard, I would get rewarded. In school, it was a good grade. At work, hopefully it was recognition or a promotion or maybe a bonus or something like that. And I found for me, I had some managers who were really great at that, asking what I did every week, how can we help you get to the next step in your career plan? And then I also had some other managers who maybe weren't the best people, know how to develop people. And I would see that, hey, I did a great job, but my project's not getting talked about at that quarterly business review. And I started to sense, oh, okay, I see my colleagues who are doing a bit more of that work, promoting themselves, talking about themselves, are getting that recognition. So why is this important? One, career advancement and development. If you are working on high value projects, if you are getting your work in front of leadership, that's going to help you, because when the powers that be sit down at that table to have conversations around, we have this opening, who should we consider, your name's going to come up, and that's great. And then also it can help identify your strengths and weaknesses. So I'll talk about it in the next slide a little bit more about how I do this. But if you think about, if you're meeting with your manager saying, hey, I really want to get from that senior to that staff or that lead title, what can I do? Having those conversations can help you get a sense of, here's what I'm already good at, and then also identify, here's maybe what I need to improve on, or which I need to even demonstrate more, so that the people who are making those decisions can see that I have those skills. And once you identify those things that you need to work on, you can work on them and then promote them. So what does this look like? One, you have to identify your personal goals. Let me see if we have more hands on this question. Who here has 1 to 2 career goals right now? Okay, we have some. Hopefully, and next week, you're all like, wow, what a great talk, and everyone's hand would be raised. Because once you identify those goals, you can start thinking about tracking your accomplishments and getting opportunities that will help you towards those goals. So, say my goal is to lead a team of 10 data scientists. And I decided to raise my hand and I mentored the intern for the summer. I would write that down and put an arrow with that to that goal. Really sitting down and taking the time to think about what did I do that can help me get to that point. This is also incredibly helpful when it comes time for things like annual or mid-year reviews. I know early on in my career, I'd be like, oh yeah, time for the review. And I would sit there and be like, oh yeah, what did I do all year? Like I knew I did stuff. I have GitHub commits, I've made slide decks, but it can be really hard retrospectively to look at that. So track those accomplishments every week, every 2 weeks at a cadence that works for you. And then lastly, don't be afraid to advertise those wins. So I'm not saying don't go out there and be like super conceited and be like, hey, everybody, look at me. I did XYZ. Like, I'm hot stuff. But don't be afraid when you've done something well, own it. I think for me, especially when I was, the most junior person at the table, or even when I was often the only woman at the table earlier in my career, it can be very intimidating to speak up and say you contributed something. Especially early on, you might not think, well, oh, I just fixed this little bug, it wasn't a big deal. But no, someone had to do it, and maybe that helped the product not be down for a little bit. So don't be afraid to advertise those wins. And then my last lesson, and this is great because you're already at a conference, is dedicate the time to build a network. So I used to describe networking as a necessary evil. I try not to say that anymore because I think evil's too strong of a word. Maybe not if I'm talking to a group of, introverted engineers and data people. But for me, my network has proven to be invaluable so many times. Every potential client I've engaged with in my consulting business or have gotten projects through, I've met through my network or at a networking event. It's also great to just be able to bounce ideas off of people as well. So why is this important? 2 main reasons is to gain knowledge and find opportunities. So yes, I have had people I met through network refer me for jobs that I eventually got. That's great, but I think oftentimes people tend to focus on networking only for finding opportunities. So, oh, I just got laid off, now I'm going to go to a bunch of networking events. And I think they often overlook the potential to gain knowledge. So when you come to something like this, you can meet people in different companies who have your same position, who are at different positions, and that can be really helpful just for having a sounding board. People that you can reach out to, hey, I'm having this issue at my company. Do you mind answering a few questions? Have you seen a situation like this? How did you handle it? That sort of thing, which is great. And what does this look like? So 1, tapping into existing communities. So you're already here, that's great. I know PyCon has a great community across different countries in Europe. For me, I'll often use for my university and my graduate school, they have an alumni directory that I can search and see who works at this company. Does anyone have the same job title as me? And reach out to them that way. And then data and engineering meetups as well. It doesn't have to be a whole conference. There are some meetups who they don't even have presentations. It'll just be an hour-long social hour. And you just go up and meet other people who are working in the industry. And I know for me, I was always very hesitant, especially as a student and early in my career, to go network. Because to me, I was like, if I go up to these professionals, I'm going to feel like I'm wasting their time, right? I'm just out of school. I don't have anything to offer. But what I found pretty quickly was, yeah, maybe in the beginning it was more me just learning about career questions and their companies. But I've definitely had people reach out to me who are much more senior than me and be like, hey, I saw you know so-and-so. Do you mind introducing me to them? So you do have value even if you don't think you do. It doesn't take a huge network or anything like that. And questions I always like to ask people if they're more senior are things like, what do you wish you knew about your career 10 years ago? What do you wish you knew when you were first applying out of school? Talking about any classes they wish they had taken or skills that they wish they had gotten before that job. So again, I don't like to say necessary evil. I will acknowledge, though, it can feel awkward. It's a bit of getting out of your comfort zone. But we have a coffee break coming up, which is a great excuse for everyone to go practice. Maybe try to meet someone you haven't at the conference yet. And so with that, I just wanted to share my contact information. So that QR code will just bring you to my LinkedIn. Email or LinkedIn are the best ways to get in touch with me. I also have my website there where I'll post these slides as well. And if we have any time, I'll be happy to take a couple questions.
Thank you very much for your... Thanks for presentation. My question would be, especially for juniors in analytics and data science, how much time should people dedicate for learning besides the actual work stuff that they have to do? So do you see the value in that? And let's say you code in Python, but learn maybe more R or more HTML or whatever. So how would you see that area? Thank you.
Yes, definitely. So for me personally, I'll try to do at least a few hours a week if I can on what I'm learning. It kind of varies based on just priorities for that week. I think definitely, especially when you're more junior, it's important. I would say, and a callback to my slides, that's where identifying your goals are really important. So like for me, I code mostly Python and SQL. I know R, I've never used it in industry. My jobs are always, for the most part, going to be Python unless something eliminates Python. So I tend to focus my time more on like emerging technologies. So like when neural networks started to become more popular, like learning about that as well. So I think it's just making sure that you have a sense of where you want your career to go. It can change though. It's not set in stone, right? But that can help you be a bit more strategic because it can get very overwhelming if you're like, let me learn every single language and model and database setup and all of that. So definitely important. And when I am working in industry, I'll ask employers like, how do you support employees to do that? Because that can also be a great way to get that time built in, is if they're like, we care about developing the team. So it's just something I look for.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll ask something. So if you, with your consultancy, right? If you lose your network, you don't have a network anymore, and you have to start looking for clients, where do you begin? Considering the fact the places like Upwork and others are extremely populated already, what would you do?
Yeah, so to be frank, I've personally never used Upwork, but I would identify in the place where I lived you always want to start thinking about like who's a good potential client. So like I mentioned, I'll offer data strategy services. So something like a startup where they maybe don't have the budget right now to bring on somebody who can do data full time, but they need someone to help plan how can they track data, who might they need to hire for that. So I would look at going to something like an entrepreneurs meetup, a startup meetup, small businesses as well, just because for me, that's the kind of client that I typically focus on. And then also some data meetups as well, but that's more so of just rebuilding that network and those connections, maybe not potential clients.
Okay, thank you for the talk. Thanks, Megan.